So if you want to go ahead and screen share and yeah.
All right. So we are in the skeletal system still, covering bones. I kind of geeked out the last few days and was looking up these X-ray images of different hand signs. Definitely worth using one as your wallpaper if you're in the search for one. So Google image X-ray hands, and I think you'll come up with some interesting stuff. So our essential question, I don't know, Miss Asher got me going last class when she brought up osteoblasts, right? And if you recall, osteoblasts are these cool little bone cells that are in charge of building bone. And it got me thinking. I was like, well, how does the body grow and maintain bone? Like, what's going on there? Like, it's a living organ, but like, why isn't it degrading? Why isn't it growing bigger after 30? Like, what's going on there to maintain homeostasis? Well, first, I think it's interesting to look at what bone is actually made of. If you're like me, you like the show, how is it made? Really, it boils down to two things. It's mostly mineral salts, so like calcium phosphate. If you hear, people telling you or recommending you in dietary guidelines to consume more milk or dairy or calcium for healthy bones, this is what they mean. It's because bones, like 70% of it, is made up of calcium phosphate. It kind of helps cement it in place. Without it, your bones are kind of like a wet spaghetti noodle. They just kind of flop around. They lose that structural integrity. They're also made up of what's called collagen, and collagen's a protein. If you remember from last class, I call it the Mr. Glass syndrome, osteogenesis imperfecta. That's when you lack collagen or you have a collagen kink. And what results from that is brittle bones. So you can easily fracture bones by coughing, or if you get hit, say, by a football in the arm. Like, that's enough force to actually cause a fracture when you have a deficiency in collagen. So I have this cool video that shows you like the main players in bone growth, development, and homeostasis. It's going to cover osteoblasts, osteoclasts. I think it's a wonderful animation of like what's happening on the molecular level in our bones and skeletons.
Bone is a dynamic tissue that is continually being built, broken down, and rebuilt in a process called bone remodeling. Bone tissue is broken down and resumed by multinucleated cells known as osteoclasts. These cells are derived from monocytes, which originate within bone marrow. Osteoclasts play an important role in liberating minerals and other molecules stored within the bone matrix. Bone tissue serves as a repository for vital minerals, including calcium phosphate and various biologically active molecules, such as growth factors. The release of calcium from the bone can play a role in maintaining its homeostasis within the body. The cells responsible for building new bone tissue are known as osteoblasts. Osteoblasts are thought to be derived from cells found to be associated with blood vessels. Once active, they start to produce the organic component of bone, osteoid, which is predominantly made of collagen. Minerals start to crystallize around the collagen scaffold to form hydroxyapatite, the major inorganic constituent of bone, which contains calcium phosphate.
Whoa.
Bone mineral density, or BMD, can be used to estimate the strength of bone and to assess the risk of fracture. As osteoblasts form new bone tissue, many become embedded within the matrix and differentiate into osteocytes. The structure, composition, and cellular processes that occur within bone allow it to simultaneously serve as a calcium reservoir, while providing structural support for the vital organs and for locomotion.
I thought that was pretty sweet. Love the music too, right, Miss Asher?
Yeah.
All right. So I hope you enjoyed that as much as I did. I kind of geek out over those animations, especially on the molecular level. So our bones are always changing. They're super dynamic. And what we mean by that is they're constantly being cleaned up of minerals and calcium and being repaved over. And this process is facilitated by three major bone cell players. Kind of I call them the makers and breakers of bones. So osteoblasts are going to be making new bone tissue. You saw they're doing that with calcium minerals. So that's where calcium comes into play to strengthen our bones. I think of them kind of as like when there's road construction. Those are the ones laying asphalt. They're like paving over old road. Whereas osteoclasts are kind of cleaning and breaking down bone for those pavers. So those ones will be kind of the ones tearing up road during road construction when you're going to install a new road. And I don't know if you noticed, towards the end there was something called osteocytes. And osteoblasts, typically they're going to build bone around themselves in circles. And once they've completed this circle and they're kind of all of a sudden they find themselves with no place else to go, they become an osteocyte. So they're mature. And when they become an osteocyte, they kind of become like the boss of road construction. They're sending signals when they feel stress in the bone, like a fracture or an injury. They're going to send signals to the osteocytes and say, hey, we need to clean up on aisle 2, and we got to repave and rebuild here. They're also going to transport nutrients and waste from cell to cell because, bone is tissue. It's made up of a bunch of cells. So you're going to have to transport, move things in and move things out. And that's where osteocytes come into play. So big picture, like how does bone and homeostasis impact the rest of the human body? I think this is where things get really interesting. So our body needs to maintain calcium. Calcium is not only used for bone strength, but it's used in muscle contractions. It's used in the nervous system. It's used in blood clots. And when our bloodstream, when we have very low calcium levels in the blood, our body sends signals to those osteoclasts. Those are the ones that are cleaning bone. They're removing calcium. So those guys will be activated, and they're going to clean up calcium and actually release minerals from our bone into the bloodstream so that it can be repurposed and reused elsewhere in the human body for the metabolic pathways. And before those osteoclasts basically apoptose, which is a fancy cellular word for die, they're going to signal to the osteoblasts to fill in and put new calcium, new mineral deposits in the trenches that they've been digging out. So they will apoptose, osteoblasts will form new bone where osteoclasts cleaned up, and like that, we have newer, stronger bones. And this is the bone remodeling cycle. It continues throughout our lives. This is why, basically, as adults, we can maintain constant bone density mass throughout our lifetimes in a healthy, normal, functioning body. Similarly to osteoclasts, osteoblasts can be triggered too, depending on calcium levels in the blood. So if calcium levels are too high in our blood, say you're like consuming a ton of pizza, ice cream, and milk, that'll tell the osteoblasts to take that calcium from our blood and store it in our bones for later use. And with that, any questions? What are you What are your thoughts? Love the word apoptose. Me too, Miss Asher. It's a fun one to use.
Yeah, it was. It's one of those ones that I always am unsure of how to say it, right? So, uh, apoptosis, exact. I usually say it's apoptosis, but
I like apoptosis.
I know. That's fun when you say apoptosis too. Um, Kids will always be like, "Is that really how you say it?" I'm like, "Just say it however your teacher says it." Like,
Remember it. I mean, whatever works. Cool. Well, raise your hand, type in the chat if you do have any questions. Otherwise, I also included in the slides, we're not going to cover it today, but I included it on Schoology in the PDF. 2 slides on bone growth if you're interested. So, like when in your early years, like from infancy, how cartilage turns into bone, and also where in the bone you can expect growth to happen. But that's kind of like extra reading for you if you're curious about that. Otherwise, we have 2 readings to do over the weekend and then an assessment to complete on Schoology, which is 7.4. The first reading is about astronauts and this phenomenon of astronauts losing bone mineral density while they're in space. And so this is a cool article by Stanford Medicine. For those of you that want to be doctors, nurses, I think it's a super sweet article. Even if you're just into space travel like I am, I think this will be an interesting read. Pretty short. And then there's also this article on exercise and diet, which is pretty sweet as well.
okay, I'll stop recording now.